Once upon a time, in a world engulfed in battle, a fierce battle was raging on a battlefield. As mortar units launched their ammunition, soldiers from one side armed with rifles charged forward, ready for the attack. Amidst the chaos of the battle, soldiers from both sides were being wounded. Some suffered bullet wounds, while others lay dying on the ground, desperately calling for help. In the midst of the turmoil, a soldier found himself surrounded by enemy troops. Just as they were about to open fire, a young girl descended from the sky to his rescue. She was no ordinary soldier, but a mage possessing magical powers that granted her a certain superiority in combat. Up above in the sky, a girl named Tanya de Gurachev, clad in the uniform of a second lieutenant, aimed her rifle towards the enemy troops. With a powerful incantation, she unleashed a shot that obliterated the targeted enemies. The story now shifts to reveal the state of the world. In a country known as the Empire, military maneuvers were underway to quash revolutions and protests organized by opposing political factions that opposed the Empire's form of governance. Within a military strategy office, the Director of Operations and Strategy, Brigadier General Kurt von Ruderdorf, the Deputy Director of Operations and Strategies, Lieutenant Colonel Erich von Rurugen, and another Deputy Director, Brigadier General Hans von Setter, engaged in a discussion. They were troubled by the failure of Plan 315, a strategy meant to ensure their superiority over their enemies, and the losses suffered on the Rin battlefields. Returning to the battlefield, Tanya de Gurachev, now a platoon commander and a member of her squadron, Victoria Ivanovna Serebriakov, soared above the enemy troops, awaiting an opportune moment to strike. Against the captain's orders, two corporals from the squadron decided to directly attack the enemy, much to the dismay of their platoon commander. Tanya was furious, as their mission was to halt the enemy's advance, not to recklessly engage in a direct attack. As night fell, the two corporals and Victoria gathered around a campfire for dinner when they were summoned to their commander's tent. Tanya, disappointed by their disobedience, decided to send them back home, refusing to tolerate insubordination within her platoon. However, the corporals vehemently refused to leave, further provoking Tanya. Eventually, she understood their grievances and promised to consider alternative actions. The next morning, as Victoria prepared to resume her duties, Lieutenant First Class Schwarzkopf delivered the news that the two corporals, who were once her fellow frontline comrades, had been sent to the rear under Tanya's request. Victoria felt relieved, believing that they would be safer away from the front lines. During the night, as Tanya's platoon flew above the battlefield, Victoria, overwhelmed by exhaustion from prolonged magical flight, fell to the ground. Tanya descended and urged her to get back in the air, reminding her that weakness was not an option for a soldier. Tanya then informed Victoria that they had an urgent meeting to attend at the camp. Back at the camp, Tanya and her platoon are summoned for a meeting where they learn about the capture of some observers by observer hunters. Commander Tanya announces that soldier Victoria cannot accompany her on the mission, but Victoria insists until she is granted permission to go. As the platoon approaches the location, their enemies, the hunter group, have already eliminated all the observers. Tanya laments their late arrival, but proceeds to attack the hunters to avenge her fallen comrades. Before engaging them, she instructs her platoon to stay back as she takes on the enemies alone. Tanya launches a fierce attack on the hunters, swiftly taking down several of them. As she prepares to attack their leader, one of the hunters steps in and gives their life for their leader's safety. Undeterred, Tanya continues her relentless attack. After eliminating a significant number of hunters, she ascends to a height inaccessible to them. From there, she addresses the remaining hunters, attempting to negotiate. However, they betray her trust and open fire at the first chance they get. Tanya realizes that negotiation is pointless and decides to wipe them out completely using a devastating destruction spell through her rifle, erasing all trace of the hunter's existence. Meanwhile, in Parisy, the Republic's capital, Lieutenant Colonel Severin Vianto of the Magic Company 3 shows Tanya, referred to as the Rin Demon, some photographs. Simultaneously, a strategic meeting is taking place in another room, involving the Republic's key leaders. Victoria discovers that her former comrades, who were sent to the rear, lost their lives when an unexpected projectile hit their fort. When she heads to Tanya's tent to convey the news, she is horrified to learn that Tanya already knew this would happen and intentionally sent those soldiers to their last moments. In that moment, Victoria realizes that her commander is a monster in the guise of a young girl. We find ourselves in a completely different world than the one we knew. We witness an office worker being dismissed by his merciless boss who shows no compassion whatsoever. This boss strolls calmly through the streets of Chicago until he reaches the train station. As he waits for his train to arrive, he is suddenly pushed onto the tracks by the same man he had just fired. While falling towards the train tracks, time inexplicably freezes. The man begins to see everything in slow motion as a strange voice speaks through the motionless people at the station. It is a divinity, presenting itself as God. Although the man refers to it as being X, they engage in a conversation about the existence of God and reincarnation. The man constantly questions the things the voice tells him, leading to a conclusion that the man lacks faith in God because he lives comfortably enough to not need it. Therefore, being X decides to reincarnate him into the past, a place where he would not be comfortable and would have to fight for his life. Time returns to normal, and the man is struck by the train. We now find ourselves in a world over 100 years in the past, where a girl named Tanya is being born. She happens to be the reincarnation of the man who was struck by the train. It is the year 1913, and Tanya finds herself in a very poor orphanage where resources are scarce, barely enough for a bit of food. The situation in the country she lives in is worrisome, and she wonders how a girl her age can survive in such a world. In this world, there exists a peculiar power called magic. During an examination, Tanya's magical abilities are discovered, and she is recruited into the military to be trained as an officer. She quickly demonstrates her skills and superiority over her comrades, ultimately becoming an instructor who trains new recruits who underestimate her due to her small size and young age. During a training session, one of her recruits challenges her, and in her anger, she decides to punish him. Just as she is about to fire, her superiors intervene and restrain her. In order to graduate from the military academy, Tanya must complete her deployment mission. As she sets out, she notices the presence of enemy troops approaching her area. She decides to notify the military, who then choose to take action and swiftly attack the enemies. Everything seems to be going well as they quickly eliminate the enemy, and Tanya remains unharmed. However, they are suddenly ambushed by a group of enemies who ruthlessly open fire on Tanya, despite her role as an observer, not an attacker. Tanya manages to dodge their bullets, but they begin to pursue her. Tanya requests reinforcements but is informed that they will arrive in 600 seconds, which is too long. Upon hearing this, Tanya asks for permission to withdraw, but her request is denied, and she is ordered to hold off the enemy for as long as necessary. Tanya becomes frustrated but agrees to carry out the mission. Determined, Tanya turns around and decides to confront her enemies. With agility, she manages to eliminate several of them, including one of their captains. As more and more enemies arrive, Tanya's only thought is to delay them long enough for the reinforcements to arrive. At one point, she runs out of ammunition and resorts to a desperate measure, causing an explosion to eliminate the enemies around her, even at the cost of her own safety. After executing her risky attack, Tanya falls from the sky, assuming that her life would end in that moment. The next day, Tanya woke up in a hospital bed, her body completely covered in bandages. She slowly opened her eyes and found herself surrounded by several high-ranking military personnel. Their presence could only mean one thing: they were there to congratulate her on her remarkable feat. Tanya's heart skipped a beat as she realized that this recognition might come with a price she was not willing to pay. Demonstrating her true potential could potentially lead to being sent to the front lines of battle, a prospect that troubled her greatly. As Tanya lay there, contemplating her uncertain future, we shift our focus to an unknown location. In a dimly lit room, a mysterious man stood by a table, diligently working on something. The table was strewn with various newspapers, all showcasing the headline featuring none other than Tanya. The man muttered to himself, acknowledging the immense power possessed by this young girl. He knew that corrupting such a force of nature would not be an easy task. After healing her wounds, Tanya heads to her captain's office to find out her new assignment. She hopes she didn't get deployed to the front lines. In the letter handed to her, she is notified that she has been assigned to the Tactical Instruction Squadron at home. Tanya is thrilled but tries to hide her excitement. She is sent to test a new flight equipment, which turns out to be quite complicated to use, resulting in a comical mid-air explosion. Tanya finds herself soaring to unimaginable heights to test the new flight equipment. The unstable equipment causes her to complain through the communicator. On the other end, she speaks with Adelheid von Schugel, the chief engineer of the Imperial Military Technology Department. Von Schugel orders her to fly higher since the equipment is designed to reach 18,000 meters. At a great altitude, the equipment starts malfunctioning, and Tanya decides to release her energy to shut down the engine. Successfully, the engine shuts off, but the equipment experiences another failure and explodes once again. Back on solid ground, Tanya removes the faulty equipment and angrily heads to her room. Dr. von Schugel follows her, trying to convince her that the equipment works and she just didn't know how to use it. However, Tanya pays no attention to his words. In her room, she drafts a letter to the headquarters, requesting a transfer to the battlefield. As night falls, Tanya receives a letter informing her that the von Schugel project has been cancelled. This news brightens her spirits, and she happily lies down in bed. Suddenly, time freezes once again. It's the ex-being paying her a visit. He reproaches her for not believing in God yet, and Tanya remains steadfast in her disbelief. The ex-being declares that he will have to perform a miracle to change her mind, but Tanya doesn't believe in miracles either. Tanya wakes up and notices a note on her table, which reads, "God wants it." Tanya returns to the testing field, this time to experiment with a new equipment focused on magic energy transformation. She takes off with the new equipment and flies as high as she can. Upon reaching a great altitude, the equipment starts malfunctioning once again. Tanya communicates to Dr. von Schugel that it won't work, but he reveals that it will. He claims to have received a visit from God the night before, where brilliant ideas illuminated his mind, ensuring that the equipment would function. The key to success, he insists, lies in worshiping God. Tanya refuses to believe in God, and as her equipment is on the verge of explosion, time freezes, and the figure of God appears in a toy-like form. God tells her that the only way to unleash the equipment's full potential and magical abilities is by using his name and worshiping him. He demonstrates the miracle he performed and lets her plummet through the air. While falling, Tanya understands that resisting God is futile and utters his name, causing the equipment to ignite and function properly, something that had never happened before. Meanwhile, Dr. von Schugel walks on solid ground, elated by the success of his flight equipment. We jump back to the year 1924, where the ongoing conflict is more alive than ever, and Tanya finds herself amidst a battlefield, firing upon enemy troops. Tanya feels frustrated as to use her abilities to their full potential. She must constantly utter the name of God, which she considers a curse. In the Empire's Operations and Strategy Planning Office, they discuss what to do with Tanya. Despite being an outstanding soldier, she possesses a dangerous personality and the peculiar trait of the Equipment 95 only functioning with her. In the camp, Tanya approaches Victoria and hands her an envelope, notifying her that she recommended her for promotion to captain. This brings much joy to Victoria, and she thanks Tanya and God. Excited about receiving a promotion due to her combat achievements, Tanya awaits her transport to be taken to the military university. While waiting, she is bid farewell by Lieutenant Schwarzkopf, who wishes her luck at the university and expresses gratitude for her services and assistance in developing the Equipment 95. While two high-ranking military personnel discuss the situation on the Rhine, Tanya enters her train carriage to head to her next destination, unaware that she is being targeted by a powerful individual within the army. A new day begins in the imperial capital of Buran. It has been 6 months since Tanya left the battlefield, yet she still vividly remembers the gunpowder and destruction that plagued the front lines. Tanya rises from her bed and gets ready, listening to the radio for the latest news. She dons her uniform, slings her rifle over her shoulder, and heads out of her room towards the military university. Walking through the university halls, Tanya feels empowered by her metal-clad uniform, pleased that things are going as she desires. In her first class, her professor poses a question to a fellow student who answers incorrectly. The professor then directs the same question to Tanya, who responds correctly. After class, Tanya remains in the room, cleaning her rifle. Her professor, Captain Maximilian Johann von Uger, approaches her and asks why she's always cleaning her rifle. Tanya replies that she must always be prepared for when it may be needed. In the library, Tanya struggles to reach a book on a high shelf due to her height. An unknown man comes to her aid, and to her amazement, it turns out to be Subdirector of Strategies and Operations Zetor. He invites Tanya to accompany him, and she agrees without hesitation. Zetor leads Tanya to his office, where they engage in a dialogue about the ongoing conflict in their country, discussing its military power and the potential for it to escalate into a global conflict. Tanya carefully expresses her opinions, aligning her thoughts with Zetor's to gain his trust. After proposing her strategies for handling the conflict, Zetor requests that she put them in writing for consideration. Tanya gets up, leaves the office, and sets out to fulfill Zetor's request. In a train compartment, Lieutenant Colonel Erich von Rugen reads the anonymously delivered letter written by Tanya, outlining how a global conflict could be initiated. He is taken aback by the idea, questioning whether such a thing is truly possible or not. Sitting in a cafe, sipping tea and reflecting on how everything seems to be going well, Tanya is interrupted by Captain Uger, who joins her for a conversation. He asks why she joined the military, and Tanya explains that her father was a soldier, and with her mother abandoning her, she had no choice but to follow in his footsteps. Captain Uger requests that she leave the military since he has a young daughter and fears for her potential involvement. Tanya comforts him, assuring him of her capabilities. She invites the captain to lunch, but he declines and departs. At the strategic headquarters, a debate unfolds regarding the possibility of executing the plan outlined in the anonymous letter. Eventually, everyone agrees to move forward since the plan poses minimal losses in case of failure. They decide that Tanya, the letter's author, should lead the execution. In a camp, Erich von Rurugen is informed that Tanya will be selected for the plan. He becomes furious, as he does not believe she is a suitable choice due to her dangerous personality. Back at the strategic headquarters, Tanya is invited to dine with Brigadier General Kurt von Ruderdorff and Zedor. After the meal, they present her with 3 documents stating potential assignments. However, the general hands her a 4th document and abruptly leaves the room. This last document reveals that her next assignment will be leading a battalion of mages on the front lines, the most perilous position available. Tanya is taken aback since she was the one who proposed the idea. Zedor informs her that she must quickly select 48 mages as they need to have the battalion ready as soon as possible. Tanya agrees, stands up, and exits the room after receiving a warning from Zedor to behave, as she has garnered a negative reputation among the captains. In her office, Tanya finds herself surrounded by papers, applications from those seeking to join the mage battalion. Just when she thinks nothing else could surprise her, Victoria, her former soldier, suddenly enters the office, offering her assistance. Victoria informed Tanya that she had been assigned to be her secretary by the headquarters. Pretending to be happy about it, Tanya immediately put her to work, assisting her with the papers on her desk. As new candidates arrived to join the mage battalion, Tanya devised a test to filter them out. She created an illusion of a sergeant who would interview the candidates. Those who detected the deception would be accepted, while those who didn't would be sent back to their previous units. Tanya requested a month from her superiors to train the new candidates to meet her standards. The following day, Tanya commenced the training for her battalion. She began by shooting projectiles at them for 36 hours, testing their survivability. After the grueling test, she handed them a map with a destination they must reach within 48 hours without using defensive cartridges or flight magic. Along the way, they encountered various obstacles, the most terrible being an avalanche that almost left several soldiers frozen beneath the snow. Tanya had to descend to save one of them. After reprimanding them, all the candidates decided to continue the training. After a month of intense training, the preparation was finally complete. Tanya stood before her troops, declaring them imperial mages and encouraging them to fight for their nation. Now in the office outside the strategic imperial headquarters, Tanya sat at her desk, regretting having created the battalion as it only brought her more work. Victoria entered and informed her that a messenger was waiting outside. Tanya encountered Erich von Rurugen, who congratulated her on her promotion and informed her of the mission her battalion would face in the southeast. Before leaving, he suggested that Tanya learn Dacian while in the southeast. In the southeastern theater, Tanya gathered with the trackers in a room and was astonished to learn that the enemy consisted of over 600,000 men with no aerial power, causing her to contemplate the enemy's limited military strength. As Tanya headed towards her battalion, she realized it was her birthday, which motivated her to inspire her soldiers to give their all on the battlefield. While flying towards the enemy troops, Tanya instructed a group from her battalion to shoot any enemy soldiers they spotted, taking advantage of firing from above. The powerful mages easily overwhelmed their adversaries, who were unable to counter their attacks. However, the situation suddenly shifted as Tanya noticed her men becoming disorganized while the enemies began to regroup. Taking action, she dropped explosives throughout the battlefield, swiftly ending the battle. Tanya and her battalion reached the enemy camp, eliminating all the soldiers except for their captain, who held valuable information. They decided to seize any strategically valuable items found in the camp. Emerging from the tent, soldiers informed Tanya that reinforcements were arriving, prompting her to take her battalion to the capital to test their capabilities. Upon reaching the capital, Tanya decided not to attack the city directly. Instead, they focused on destroying the weapons factory, sending a message to the citizens that surrender was their only option. Tanya and her battalion prepared for the attack. Tanya uttered a prayer before unleashing their attack, obliterating the factory and causing explosions to ripple throughout the city. Seeing the destruction, Tanya and her troops saw it as fireworks. After annihilating the factory, they returned to their headquarters. 7 days have passed since Tanya's battalion defeated the Dacia troops and successfully attacked their city. In a meeting room, the highest-ranking officials of the army gathered to discuss the next steps of the conflict. They conclude that, in order to better prepare themselves for a possible global conflict, they must first seize weaker areas, such as Dacia. They also discuss the scarcity of supplies in the country, but Brigadier General Kurt von Ruderdorf proposes a solution that involves the battalion's magic users who attacked the Dasha capital. In the Imperial Army's Southeast Theater, Tanya informs her entire battalion that they have been transferred to another location as their mission in Dasha has ended. They are to head north the following day. Tanya and Victoria have a conversation in the hallway, questioning the reasons why they are being sent to the north, as Tanya believes that the conflict should have already ended by now. She even begins to suspect that the being known as X who claims to be God is manipulating the course of events. At the Ministry of Defense in the capital of the Entente Alliance, a council meeting takes place with the Alliance's top 10 members. They discuss their odds of facing the Empire, and unanimously agree that with their current resources, they will be unable to hold their ground. Consequently, they decide to seek foreign assistance. Meanwhile, at the Imperial Army's northern supply base in the Kragana region, a group of Imperial mages engages in combat against enemy mages. The defenders of the Empire find themselves overwhelmed in both numbers and power, as the enemy side includes foreign magicians. The adversaries they face are formidable, quickly decimating Imperial troops. The captain of this group is wounded and forced to retreat from the battle. Just when all hope seems lost, they receive the news that they are allowed to withdraw, as an elite battalion of mages is coming to their rescue, Tanya's battalion. While the combat unfolds, in the strategic command of the Imperial Army's Northern Front, Lieutenant General Heinrich Schures, the strategic commander of the Northern Front, is with his men planning a relief plan for the battalion that has come to save them. Tanya contacts him through her communicator to inform him that they will not require any assistance. As they monitor the ongoing battle, everyone in the room is astonished by the speed and altitude at which Tanya's battalion operates. Back in the battle, a portion of Tanya's battalion confronts the foreign mages and realizes they are stronger than anticipated. Tanya motivates her troops to keep fighting, and inspired by her words, they continue the struggle. Tanya and the remaining soldiers with her observe the approaching attack planes. Tanya orders her men to handle the escorts while she takes care of destroying the planes. With incredible speed, Tanya ascends to the same altitude as the planes, evading all gunfire and easily destroying the first plane. The remaining planes drop their armaments and retreat. Tanya decides to launch a multiple attack, successfully downing several planes before taking the surviving pilots as prisoners. However, upon reaching them, she discovers that none of them are alive. Disappointed, Tanya turns away, and suddenly time freezes. It's the being known as X, speaking through the fallen soldier's body, revealing that the impending global conflict has been orchestrated to punish Tanya for her lack of faith. Growing weary of hearing the voice, Tanya shoots the fallen soldier's body and walks away. At an observation post of the Allied Kingdom's army, somewhere in Norden, Lieutenant Colonel Sir Isaac Dustin Drake and his men are tracking and monitoring Tanya's movements. Unexpectedly, their attempt to track her leads to Tanya discovering their location. In a bold move, she fires a magical shot towards the cabin, destroying the headquarters, but the men survive as they manage to escape before the impact. In the Ministry of Defense in the capital of the Republic, the Deputy Minister of Defense and the Army, General Pierre Michelab Luga, receives the report that the foreign mages sent to attack the northern base have been stopped by a powerful battalion of mages. In another location, Tanya is welcomed to the north by General Kurt von Ruderdorf, the commanding officer of the Imperial Army's Northern Front. He congratulates her on her performance in combat and provides her with the details of her new mission. The mission entails eliminating an enemy defensive stronghold. Tanya agrees to the mission and makes it clear that she will not hesitate to eliminate whoever the enemy may be. Meanwhile, in the hallway of the Entente Alliance's Ministry of Defense, Colonel Anson Su is walking. A soldier approaches him to congratulate him on his promotion, but the colonel does not appear to be very happy about it since his promotion means facing more danger. He glances at a photo of his wife and daughter that he keeps in his uniform and continues walking. At the port of Arnalis, part of the Entente Alliance, Colonel Anson Su bids farewell to his wife and daughter, deciding to send them by ship to another country to protect them from the impending conflict. A soldier delivers a suitcase left by his daughter, containing a state-of-the-art rifle with his initials engraved on it. On the other side, Tanya attends a strategic meeting at the Northern Front. She disagrees with the Northern Front general, who wants a direct attack to swiftly end the conflict, while Tanya prefers managing supplies and prolonging the battle. Tensions rise, but Tanya exits the room calmly. Tanya then meets alone with Brigadier General Kurt von Ruderdorf and his operations deputy to discuss her course of action. As she explains her plan, she uncovers the general's true motive, using their battalion as a decoy while landing troops by sea. Shocked by her discovery, the general authorizes her plan. Their target is the Ors Fjord, On the other side, Colonel Anson Su grows worried, knowing his territory will soon be attacked with insufficient troops for defense. Tanya's battalion boards an airplane, soaring over El Fiordo. She instructs Victoria that if she loses communication, a retreat should be ordered. After rallying her troops, the battalion dives from the aircraft, aiming to secure the Orsfjord within 30 minutes. The forces at the Fiordo, led by Colonel Anson Su, realize that Tanya's battalion is attacking. While they strive to destroy the enemy cannons, Anson's troops struggle against them. Magician reinforcements arrive at El Fiordo, prompting Tanya to confront them with only one squadron while the rest of her team destroys the cannons. Tanya and her squadron clash with the enemy magicians, led by Colonel Anson Su. Tanya's main objective is to delay them, allowing her comrades to swiftly eliminate the cannons. Anson locks eyes with Tanya and boldly charges towards her. In the midst of the fight, they receive news that all cannons have been destroyed, enabling the Empire's ships to embark unimpeded. The ships reach El Fiordo and destroy all its installations. Furious at his inability to defend his territory, Colonel Anson decides to pursue Tanya, determined to end her once and for all. Realizing this, Tanya confronts him as well. After exchanging fire, Tanya successfully delivers a fatal blow, ending the colonel's life and causing him to fall into the water, not before taking his rifle, which had caught her eye. The Imperial troops successfully capture El Fiordo. As they celebrate their victory with a grand dinner, Tanya gazes over the edge, proud of the destruction she has caused. Meanwhile, as the defeated enemies lament their loss, Brigadier General Zetter and his operations deputy discuss how their landing mission was a resounding success. It is the year 1925, and Tanya and her battalion find themselves on a battlefield, fighting against enemy troops. They easily defeat the ground forces until they spot a group of enemy wizards approaching. Tanya orders her men to take down the ground artillery and the enemy wizards while she observes the battlefield from above. As they return to the camp and have dinner, a soldier enters, searching for Tanya. The second-in-command receives him, and the soldier informs them of an emergency. In Tanya's office, she is informed of a rebellion in Arian, a territory of the Republic. Later, in a strategy office, she is given the task of eliminating the wizards who joined the rebels in Arian. They explain that they must attack the city but will send an evacuation order beforehand. Anyone who remains in the city after receiving the order will be considered an enemy, whether they are wizards, soldiers, or civilians. Tanya accepts the mission and leaves the room. Tanya gathers her men to speak with them. Standing before them, she provides the details of their next mission. She tells them they must eliminate anyone who doesn't surrender. Many of her men are shocked as they don't want to attack civilians and even question the morality of the mission. Tanya and her battalion arrive in Arian. As they fly over the city, they notice it is deserted. They initially believe everyone has evacuated, but to their surprise, it's an ambush set by the enemy wizards to annihilate them. Enemy snipers begin firing at Tanya's troops, and they decide to fight back. They scatter and locate their enemies. Despite the strength of the enemy wizards, Tanya's men continue to fight. Tanya's second-in-command is wounded in the shoulder, and she orders him to retreat and bring the wounded with him. The enemy wizards, overwhelmed by Tanya's forces, take refuge in a building. Tanya addresses the people in the city, urging their surrender and for their commanding officer to show himself. One of the prisoners they have in a building decides to run, and the rebels shoot him in the back. Witnessing this, Tanya contacts headquarters to authorize the attack and destruction of the city. The military arrives and starts launching projectiles, destroying buildings, homes, and causing numerous casualties. After the projectile strikes, some civilians and remaining enemy wizards still stand. Tanya receives the order to eliminate them. As she is about to do so, Lieutenant Grants interrupts her, pleading with her not to. Tanya strikes him, throwing him to the ground. She tells him it is her duty to eliminate her enemy, then hands him her rifle and asks him to aim at the enemies instead. Fed up with Tanya's words, Lieutenant Grants takes the rifle and aims it at her, but before he can shoot, he is the one hit by a bullet. Erich von Rurugen and Zetter discuss an article written by Tanya, in which she expresses the reasons why it may be legal to attack a city. They both acknowledge her brilliance, and Zetter decides to assign her a highly important task that could potentially end the conflict once and for all. A few days before the Battle of Arian, Tanya was dining on a train when Major Uger interrupted to discuss the plans for the takeover of Arian at the headquarters. Meanwhile, the high-ranking officers convened a meeting to strategize on maintaining supplies and expediting the conflict's end. They decided to deceive the enemy and strike when they least expected it, aiming to secure victory despite the knowledge that it wouldn't guarantee ultimate success. On the battlefield along the Rhine front, a fierce battle raged between the Republic and the Imperial troops, with the Imperial army struggling against the enemy's powerful artillery despite Tanya's battalion's support. While given permission to retreat, Tanya refused, fearing that doing so would arouse enemy suspicion and jeopardize the plan's success. Engrossed in a communication device, Tanya failed to notice a bullet heading her way. The plan commenced with a staged retreat, convincing the enemy forces that the Empire was withdrawing, leading them to decide against pursuing. In the camps, medical personnel attended to the wounded soldiers, treating numerous severe injuries. General Grants, who previously argued with Tanya, examined Victoria, who miraculously survived. At the headquarters, Tanya met with Erich von Rurugen, the Deputy Director of Operations and Strategies, who expressed gratitude for her support and assigned her a mission to directly eliminate the enemy's main general, causing chaos among their ranks. Tanya accepted the mission, but proposed a new strategy, highlighting the challenge of reaching the Captain General. Their discussion was abruptly interrupted by Dr. von Schugel's entrance. Dr. von Schugel presented a new high-speed aircraft capable of reaching the target in record time. Though skeptical, Tanya was convinced by the doctor and the deputy director to utilize the new vehicle. Meanwhile, in the Rhine region, the enemy forces assumed the Empire's retreat, allowing them to advance towards the Empire's camps. At the Republic's headquarters, discussions revolved around the supposed surrender of the Empire, seen by them as a potential victory. Tanya's men anxiously awaited the military vehicles that would transport them to their destination, where they had to eliminate the enemy's headquarters and its Captain General. Only Victoria remained calm, even taking a peaceful nap. In the headquarters salon, Brigadier General Kurt von Ruderdorf and Deputy Director Hans von Zetter shared dinner, briefly discussing their nation's future while toasting to the Empire's forthcoming triumph. At dawn, Tanya and her soldiers boarded the aircraft, embarking on their attack mission to the enemy's headquarters. On a military ship during a stormy sea, enemy generals contemplate the possibility of victory in the country's conflict. They reveal their ace in the hole, the resurrected Colonel Anson Su, ready to take revenge on the Empire. Near the enemy headquarters in a forest, Tanya and her troops strategize to seize the headquarters and eliminate the Captain General. Meanwhile, at the Empire's headquarters, a meeting discusses the economic consequences of the conflict and its future implications. Tanya's battalion infiltrates a seemingly abandoned base, intending to detonate it as planned. High-ranking officials confront General Kurt von Ruderdorf about the costly conflict. Suddenly, Tanya receives news that the enemy's communication base and ammunition depot have been destroyed. The success is announced, giving the Republic a significant advantage. At the Rhine battlefield, the Republic troops advance towards the Empire's camp, unknowingly falling into a trap. Hidden explosives underground are meant to decimate their enemies. Enemy mages witness a massive explosion, wiping out countless Republic soldiers. From the dust and debris, Empire tanks and soldiers emerge, heading to attack Republic installations. The mages try to communicate but find the lines down, so they fly to the destroyed headquarters themselves. Meanwhile, General Kurt von Ruderdorf discusses the success of their plan with his subdirectors, confident in the outcome. In a submarine, Tanya and her men prepare for the secret mission codenamed Operation Rotating Door. They must eliminate all their enemies. Victory will allow them to return to the capital. At the Rhine, Republic troops struggle to defend against the powerful Empire forces, losing many lives. The Empire advances towards the main Republic facilities. Tanya and her men fly towards their designated target, ready to attack anyone they encounter. Suddenly, a magical signal nearby warns of potential threats, putting the entire battalion on high alert. While speaking through the radio, Tanya's battalion is unexpectedly ambushed from the rear. Colonel Anson Su fires, striking General Grants, causing him to collapse into the water. The battle between Colonel Anson Su and his troops against Tanya's battalion commences with intense gunfire. Tanya is forced to give orders for her men to separate and evade the enemy attacks. A fierce clash between two teams of opposing magic users, one from the Empire and the other from the Republic, ensues. Both teams engage in a heated exchange of fire and attacks. However, Tanya's battalion is outnumbered, and they seek refuge in a cloud to momentarily avoid enemy attacks. As Tanya's troops hide within the clouds, the combat momentarily halts. Suddenly, Tanya emerges from a cloud, eliminating several enemy mages and asserting her dominance. She eliminates a significant number of enemies, but then she is caught off guard by a now more powerful Colonel Anson Su, who is determined to end Tanya's life. The colonel relentlessly pursues Tanya and Victoria, swiftly dispatching her men who try to help. At one point, Tanya's second-in-command is in peril, prompting Tanya to save him. After rescuing him, Tanya must confront the colonel, who continues to pursue her. An intense aerial battle unfolds between Tanya and the colonel until she manages to disarm him and fatally stab him in the chest. However, the attack has no effect on the colonel, and he grabs Tanya's arm to make a self-destructive final strike. As he is about to self-destruct, Victoria shoots him from behind, causing him to release Tanya. Tanya then shoots him with her rifle, but it fails to affect him. Ultimately, the colonel detonates his explosive attack near Tanya. After witnessing their colonel's destruction, the enemy troops decide to retreat. Tanya's men wait near the smoke from the explosion, hoping for their captain's survival. To their relief, Tanya emerges from the smoke almost unscathed. A notification is sent to all Empire soldiers, declaring that the conflict is nearing its end and that they have emerged victorious. Rejoicing, the soldiers revel in celebration on the battlefield. Meanwhile, the remaining members of Tanya's battalion arrive, having rescued several defeated comrades, including General Grant's. In the capital city of Paris, the entire empire, from soldiers to civilians, celebrates their triumph over the Republic. The nation partakes in marches and festivities to honor their valiant heroes who gave their lives for their country. During a diplomatic meeting in the High Council of the Army, influential figures gather to toast the victory. Those who previously doubted Brigadier General Kurt von Ruderdorff now congratulate him for his achievements and contributions to the nation. Discussions arise concerning the distribution of land within the national territory and the Republic's ultimate surrender. Tanya enters a church but leaves in anger upon seeing an image of God, as she remains resentful toward the being X who sent her to this world. Exiting the church, she observes a group of children tormenting a defenseless child but decides not to intervene. Later, in her office, Tanya sits reading the newspaper until Victoria enters and informs her that her men are celebrating with a barbecue. While conversing about the conflict's end, Tanya discovers something that disturbs her greatly. They have agreed to a supposed armistice to conclude the conflict, a decision she despises. Tanya summons her entire battalion, planning an attack on the remaining Republic troops based in the military port of Brest. Tanya approaches her superior's office to request permission for the move, but it is denied. Undeterred, she decides to act on her own, firmly telling her superior not to interfere with her plans. As Tanya is about to board a plane bound for the port of Brest, Victoria informs her that headquarters has ordered the mission to be cancelled, respecting the armistice. This infuriates Tanya, prompting her to return to her office in a state of frustration. In a fit of rage, she pounds the ground and walls, bitterly lamenting the missed opportunity to end the conflict once and for all. It was nighttime, and Tanya headed to the meeting room to speak with Zetor. However, the guards informed her that neither he nor Brigadier General Kurt von Ruderdorff were present. They suggested they might be at the bar celebrating their victory. Tanya turned around and made her way to the bar when she was interrupted by the Deputy Director of Operations and Strategy, Erich von Rurugen. He invited her to his office for a drink. In his office, they sat down for coffee and discussed the outcome of the conflict. Tanya expressed her sincere opinions, stating that the Empire had missed the opportunity to achieve a complete victory. She believed they settled for the temporary conflict, which would prove costly in the future. Tanya also criticized the higher-ranking military officers celebrating and their blindness to the dangers of their victory. Erich von Rurugen attempted to convince her that the conflict was over and further fighting was unnecessary. However, Tanya disagreed, stating that if there was a possibility of the enemy seeking revenge, they would. She saw humans as irrational beings driven by emotions rather than logic. She recounted a personal experience of being pushed onto the train tracks by a former employee, emphasizing the need to destroy all traces of the enemy. This revelation left von Rurugen nervous and unsettled. Suddenly, a soldier entered the office and informed Erich von Rurugen that the remnants of the Republic's army were heading toward the southern continent to initiate a new conflict. In the south, the Republican soldiers gathered, with their general motivating them to give everything for the Republic and confront the Empire with full force. Back in Buran, rumors of a resurfacing conflict spread through the streets, heightened by newspaper reports. People grew worried, as they believed the conflict had concluded, but now faced the risk of its resurgence. Zetor and the Brigadier General dined together, discussing the potential return of battle. The general, unhappy with the situation, had believed the conflict was already settled. Zetor questioned if they had made mistakes, leading them to conclude that their failure to eliminate all enemy troops was their biggest setback. They also feared the possibility of outside nations joining forces with the Republic to form an even larger adversary. To eradicate the remaining Republican forces, they decided to send Tanya's battalion into battle. Before setting sail to the south, Tanya made a final visit to the church. While on the ship, she realized that despite the Empire's pursuit of peace, their actions had only earned them enemies worldwide. Paradoxically, the Empire's quest for peace had unleashed chaos, potentially escalating into a global conflict of unprecedented proportions. In another part of the world, specifically the United States, a young girl volunteered in the American Army, driven by the desire to prevent further victims at the hands of the Empire, just like her late parents. She was the daughter of the deceased Colonel Anson Sue. Finally, in the desert, Tanya stood before her soldiers, declaring that from that moment onward, the entire world was their enemy. She emphasized the need for utmost concentration and willingness to fight for their nation. Concluding her motivational speech with insults towards God, she claimed he was selfish and useless, placing the burden of action on herself and her troops. Inspired by her words, the soldiers decided to follow their leader. Tanya was ready for battle.